which has been a proven fact that most crimes do occur in the urban areas. So people move to Greg for that peace and quiet. However, Greg is not impervious to actually having crime occur. There had been a man, Mr. Peel, who had killed, I think, 8 people, but was acquitted back in 1986. This was 2004. And in this tiny little town in Alaska that nobody can reach either by boat, unless they take a boat, or by plane. I mean, it's very, very isolated, which the townspeople like. There are 2 men there about to, I guess, make history for the second time in this tiny little community. This all surrounded a 8-year-old woman who was the pillar of her community, volunteered at a church and other civic events, and taught disabled children for extra money to help the family. This woman is like an angel. She took care of the household. She took care of the children. Her husband, Carl, or quote, Doc, owned a real estate business in town. And he actually was more of a, I guess you'd call him, he abstained from any kind of discipline of the children. He left that up to Miss Lauri Waterman, who this whole case is around. Now, Miss Lauri Waterman was a wonderful human being. There is no reason for any ill will. She had 2 children, a boy and a girl. Jeffrey, who is away at Washington State for college, and Rochelle, who is 16, and sang in the church choir, played volleyball, and participated in her academic challenges. I mean, she was very smart, seemed to be very driven, did well in school, but underlying this facade, I guess, was a girl who was very troubled with how her mom decided to discipline her, and was troubled by the control her mom wanted to have over her. Now, I understand that teenagers do not want to be controlled by their parents. This is completely normal. Think about it. If teenagers didn't want their independence, then they would never ever leave the house. So that need for independence, need for control, is completely normal. What wasn't completely normal was the things that she started writing on her blog when she turned 15. See, Rachelle Waterman started a blog, My Crappy Life, her crappy life, right? She lives in a beautiful home. She has good parents that love her. She does well in school. She is looked after, cared for, fed, not beaten, not abused. So Faye's met a man named Mr. Radel. Well, Mr. Radel So they all three now are hanging out at their apartment. Now why was she so attracted to these men that were so much older than her? Well, they could buy her cigarettes and alcohol. They didn't live with mom and dad. I mean, they were just kind of like fuel to the fire of a rebellious teen, that's for sure. And she was hanging out with these two gentlemen, and it didn't take long before her and Mr. Arrant became physically interactive, I guess you'd say. And as they were enjoying each other's company, she would tell him of the horrors that were happening in her household between her and her mother. See, because Rochelle had told Mr. Arrant that first her mother was verbally abusing her, and even on her blog she would tell of all these kind of, I don't know, she would just blog about certain things that may have been a clue to how she felt and how she perceived their relationship. But basically, Laurie was just being a normal parent, concerned parent, and I don't blame her. I wouldn't have acted any differently. You know, my daughter's 14 and she's dating a 24-year-old. I'd have a problem with that. So then it turned to, well, you see, Mr. Arrant, my mother's now physically abusing me. And eventually, as she's telling this gentleman all of these horrible, terrible things her mother is doing to her, she finally says she's afraid for her life. Okay. Wow. I mean, this woman is just trying to get her daughter to college, because in a little town like Greg, the problem is there's only really a couple ways to get out. Either you go away to college, get formally educated, and then come back, or you spend your time on a fishing boat most of the year, away from your family, away from people, and that's basically, or have somebody who's formally educated come in and teach you. And those are really the only three ways to get some kind of job or education in that little tiny town that is so isolated from so many places. I mean, from any place, really. And then, so who were these two? Who were Mr. Radel and Mr. Arrant? being so abused by this woman. It is almost uncanny. I can't believe that they believed her. I mean, she would have to come over with bruises. I mean, for me to believe somebody was actually being physically harmed, I would have to see this proof, right? I mean, you would think, well, her husband, Carl, he knew of the rifts that was going on between his daughter and his wife. And he said, you know what, Laura, you handle it. I can't. He would just leave. He would leave, stay out of it. He would go to work. So he left the discipline up to Lauri Waterman, his wife. And he shouldn't have. He should have stepped in, I believe. I believe that he could have probably prevented a lot if he would have just said something. That way, the two parents could have come together and really worked as a team instead of, well, it's your mother. It's your mother. It's your mother. I mean, I can hear it now. Go ask your mother. I don't care. Go ask your mother. Oh, well, your mother, if that's what your mother says, can't you hear it in your mind? Well, that was not the right thing to do. Because on November 14th, 2004, well, Lauri Waterman is deep in deep sleep. Mr. Radel solely tears Lauri Waterman out of her bed and shoves her into the back of her own minivan and drives away. He drives to the outskirts of town, down a logging road, where Mr. Arrant, now this is Rochelle's current boyfriend, right, is waiting, and without saying a single word, they beat her with their fists, they beat her with their feet, they beat her with random objects, and then, to make things worse, they suffocate her, putting a bag over her head, and then they strangle her to make sure she's dead. But if this weren't enough, they put her back in her van. They lay her body in the van, they sprinkle gasoline all over her, and then they set her on fire. And you will find out during the court trials, or they found out during the court trials, that she was not dead when they did this. So poor Lauri Waterman was burned alive. I can't even imagine the terror and fear this woman felt. She knew these two boys and they aren't saying a word. She's probably pleading for her life, begging them to stop and asking them why, and they would just keep beating her with their hands and their feet, their fists, and random objects, then suffocating her, then strangling her, then burning her. Oh my God, I can't even. If I was her daughter, I would be heartbroken. And the fact that her daughter was really kind of telling for me. I didn't really feel like a lot of emotion in anything that I read about the trial or any book that I had read about with the story in it. I didn't feel that knew of the plan. She didn't think they were going to go through with it. They asked her if they should, and she said no. You know what I mean? It just, if you play it out in your mind in real life, like that's, how does that go that way? Without her having some involvement. What happens at the trial? Or, well, actually, how did they find out? Well, it's a tiny town. 1,200 people. So guess what? They're almost immediately the only two suspects. Well, Arrant, her boyfriend, is the only suspect. And within a couple hours of questioning him, he breaks down and he tells the investigators, who now are in complete awe of what he's saying, that he and Mr. Radel went, and what they did. How they beat her, suffocated her, strangled her, then set her body on fire. Just to make sure, I guess. I don't know. So, they didn't have any physical evidence, and they didn't have any confession, so they needed one of the two, right? So Mr. Arrant puts a wire on and made a deal with the prosecution, said that if he did this, then he wanted a lighter sentence. So they said okay. And he put a wire on and he got Mr. Radel to confess what he did, that he got her out of bed, that he drove her to the long, lonely road, the logging road, where they eventually, both partook in this horrid crime. Unbelievable, actually, but they convicted Radel and gave him 99 years, so basically his entire life behind bars, for what he did to Lauri Waterman, and for what Arrant did to her. They gave him 50 years. But how about Rochelle? What was Rochelle's sentencing? Well, Mr. Arrant was going to testify. So the prosecution said, okay, well, we're going to get a second trial. We're not going to try her with Mr. Radel and Mr. Arrant. So during the second trial, Mr. Arrant was supposed to testify, whether he had feelings for Rochelle or whether he did not want to be considered a snitch. He backed out and did not testify against Rochelle, which totally destroyed their case. Matter of fact, instead of getting first-degree murder, she was actually guilty. She was guilty of negligent homicide. She got 3 years. 3 years. That's it. 3 years for kind of incubating and, nurturing this plan to kill her mother. So, time served. She walks out of the courtroom, hands up in the air, saying, "Look, I shouldn't have said those things." Matter of fact, I will quote exactly what she said. Quote, "I never thought anything like this could happen," said Rachelle Waterman at her sentencing. Quote, "I never thought my teenage difficulties with my mother would result in such tragedy. I never wanted my mother dead, but I know regardless of my intent, my wishes, if I hadn't associated with those men, we would not be here today. And if I hadn't said those things to Jason Arrant,